which is obviously flattening the back end of the curve. So rising yields flatten the back end of the curve. And this is obviously a short bond. So this is going to be a short bond play. And we can obviously look at that in terms of the actual outcomes. And that's something that's been in my thoughts this morning for a very obvious reason. This is what the absolutes look like based on the 2s, 30s. So it's the 2s, 30s, 10s. And we can see that the sell that came in from these higher highs up here was very obvious. The absolutes is driving lower here. The absolutes was driving lower here. So the sells into these higher highs became very obvious, and a big sell-off. The rise after the drop was very obvious, and the rally came back in. Well, we're getting a similar type situation into the low part of bonds at the moment. The absolutes on this chart, this is a 5-minute chart, you can see the absolutes are rising. The absolutes are starting to rise off the bottom edges. What does that tell us? Well, if the number's rising for the absolutes, it means how do you achieve a rising absolute? You achieve a rising absolute by short-term rates falling and extending a steepener at the back end. So obviously if a rising absolute would look something like this perhaps, let's just do it as a green line and let's take it to the 0 point here. So a rising absolute would look like that, wouldn't it? And if you don't understand that, do the sum. So it'd be 10 minus 0, hasn't changed in any way, shape or form. We've kept that constant so that we understand this, divided by effectively nothing. Divided by nothing. So we're still at 10, aren't we? But we've actually got an absolute at 10. So an absolute at 10 would be this very big rip higher. And that absolute of 10 gives us an idea that there is very definitely a very steep curve due to the drop-off in rates. And therefore that drop-off in rates is bullish bonds. And inside of this environment, this is a falling yield environment. This is a falling yield environment. This is going to steepen the back end of the curve. And this is going to be a long bond opportunity to trade long bonds. And obviously that's the challenge we've had this afternoon in basically since the London Open on bonds after the original London sell-off. Ever since about 9 o'clock, we've actually had this green storyline evolving. And that green storyline is obviously why I'm very mindful of, that's why I'm very mindful not to stick around for this short trade. We can see that as we go into the London session open here, we could see that the absolutes were giving us a very clear sell opportunity into the London Open. But into the London session here, you can see this is very definitely driving higher at the moment. And that's putting us into the idea that coming back into swing lows, session lows, that the market definitely has a bid in it. Very obvious based on the absolutes. I've not mentioned it, and the reason why I'm mentioning it now is because it is significant to today's bottom edge bond, and simply I haven't seen anybody else mentioning it recently. So I thought perhaps people have forgotten all about the absolutes.